Next presentation, which is going to begin soon, is about I Could Never Go Vegan. It's a new documentary called I Could Never Go Vegan. And James Pickering is here. James, yes, I'm going to bring you on.
Hello. Hello, everyone.
How are you?
How are you? I'm good. How are you, Sailesh?
Very good. Thank you.
Wonderful. Thank you for having me.
The floor is yours.
Floor is mine. Thank you very much. So my name is James Pickering. I'm a writer and a producer in Sheffield in England. And my younger brother, Thomas Pickering, is a director and editor also based in Sheffield in England as well. And together we have, over the last 4 years, produced the documentary that Sailesh just mentioned, which is I Could Never Go Vegan. I think what I'd like to do first is maybe show the trailer to everyone for those that haven't seen it. So I hope this works. Am I able to share my screen, Sailesh?
Yes, you should be able to. Yeah, when you just click on the share computer sound, when you do that.
1 second. Right. So what do I need to click on? Sorry, the share sound?
Yeah, share sound.
Whereabouts is that? Sorry, Sailesh?
On Zoom now, it should be under because you already started sharing. Or when you start sharing, there'll be a square on the left, bottom left.
Square on the bottom. All right, bear with me 1 second. Let me come out of the share a second. Let me just right, so where do I want to go now to share the sound? Sorry, before I start.
In the bottom left, there should be a little box saying share computer sound.
Actually, I found today when I was sharing screen that they switched the position of it to the top right.
To the top right? Okay. All right.
On the top.
Does it say share computer sound somewhere?
I've got share screen, but not share sound. Am I being...
Okay.
After you click on the page, before you click on the screen that you want to share, but don't share it yet, then maybe.
Okay. Right, let me have a look. I will try that. Thank you very much. So share screen.
It's a checkbox, right?
Oh, yes, I've got it now. Thank you very much, whoever made that suggestion. Thank you. It's asking me to install the Zoom audio device. I do apologize for this.
It's okay. I can share because I have the...
Can you share that? Can you share that for me? Thank you, Sailesh. You've got the trailer, haven't you?
Okay, you are sharing right now. All right. Okay, I'll share. This one, right?
That's correct, yeah.
I don't think many people grasp just how serious this is.
All we see is what the industries want us to see.
We're talking about, effectively, the collapse of Earth systems.
Hello?
Hi, Mum. It's Tom. Just got a quick question for you. Why did you raise me not eating meat?
My name's Tom, and I've never eaten meat. But I can't seem to go a day without hearing from others about why they could never go vegan. Like vegans are malnourished. Climate change doesn't exist. Cheese, bacon, the food is bloody disgusting. B12, protein, animals are there for us to eat. Are these reasons justified? I need to know more.
I think there is this big misconception around you can't be vegan and strong.
What are you going to eat? You go gym, where are you going to get protein from?
I stood on the Olympic podium just 5 months shy of my 40th birthday.
I need to speak to the experts.
Do you think the public have any idea what goes on in free-range farms? in meat-eating cultures around the world, people learn to classify a small handful of animals as edible.
Issues to do with the use of other animals, the use of women's bodies.
Most people have this one-dimensional view of veganism as people who eat salads all day, which is totally wrong.
Food has now overtaken other risk factors as being the biggest thing that drives chronic disease in the Western world.
Rather than getting healthier, we're actually getting sicker.
1 in 5 people die because of an unhealthy diet.
The dairy industry has convinced us that bone health is all about calcium and calcium is all about milk.
I can't even articulate some of the things that I've seen.
When I have nightmares now, it's the sound of those pig screams that I'm hearing. The biggest cause of ecological destruction.
Humanity, technology and inventions have brought us into this situation. We can also reverse that.
Nearly 5 million deaths were caused and related to antimicrobial resistance.
This is the greatest catastrophe humanity has ever faced.
The worst experience of my life.
Thank you, Sailesh. I do apologise, there was some obviously severe lag on that trailer there, but you can find the official trailer on YouTube or on our website. I just wanted to share that to give some context before I kind of go into the making of the documentary, and also kind of what got us to the stage of wanting to make the documentary. So I was born in 1985 and my younger brother Tom was born in 1988, and we've never eaten meat. So my parents went vegetarian when they were pregnant with me. So we were raised on a vegetarian diet. We obviously ate quite a lot of dairy during that time, as anybody that was vegetarian in the 80s and 90s probably remembers the options. Vegetable lasagna, they were very cheese orientated dishes. So around the middle of the 1990s, my dad actually cut out dairy, and this was obviously pre the kind of oat milk revolution. It was very much, I remember, with rice milk. I remember having to use about a third of a carton of rice milk in a cup of tea to kind of get it to the right color. So the difficulties of people that were trying to eat maybe the whole food plant-based diets back in the 90s. And then we ourselves moved to a plant-based diet in the middle of last decade. So actually we were vegetarian for a long time. We'd cut out milk before that, but it wasn't until the middle of the last decade that we actually went vegan. And we always believed that we were vegetarian for animal welfare issues. That was the primary reason. You didn't hear so much about the environmental kind of issues back in the 80s and 90s. It was very much because we wanted to champion animal rights. And after we'd gone vegan, we went on a couple of protest marches in London because we kind of wanted to do more for the movement. And activism is obviously a really broad term, and we were working in the film industry already, kind of for our day jobs. And Tom, and I have to credit him to this, he basically had the idea, well, what is it that what is our skill set? What is it that we're able to do? And we thought that can be our form of activism. So Tom had the idea initially to make a vegan documentary that was centered around food. And at the start of 2020, just before COVID, he interviewed and spoke to a couple of doctors. He spoke to Gemma Newman and Shireen Kassam from PlantBased Health Professionals in the UK. And then COVID happened. And so over the next couple of months, he was sitting on this footage, and that was when he approached me. And obviously, I work in a producer capacity, and so he wanted to kind of put my brains on this. And he says, I want to do these kind of broad ambitions to do a big vegan documentary that can really, that he can share far and wide. So, kind of global distribution was the idea. Would I like to work with him on it? And what are my ideas to kind of make it successful? How can we make as big an impact as possible? And around this time, we'd had some really excellent documentaries. So we'd had, and in different sections as well. So if you think about the animal welfare kind of angle, we'd had Earthlings, we'd had Dominion, Land of Hope and Glory, etc. Really powerful documentaries. But one of the problems with those documentaries is it's really difficult to get people to watch them. because it's that kind of ignorance is bliss, out of sight, out of mind. And then added on to that is it's really difficult to get the streaming platforms to want to have anything to do with them as well because of the nature of the extreme content. So you can self-distribute through YouTube, or there are ways to get it out there. And those documentaries certainly have transitioned people like overnight into going vegan because they are that powerful, but it's how do you get people to watch them? So that you have them documentaries. We have the ones that have been really successful along the streaming platforms that are maybe more environmental based, but with a little bit of animal welfare stuff in there as well. So I'm thinking the likes of Cowspiracy and more recently Seaspiracy, which was very successful for Netflix. Interestingly, with Seaspiracy, that managed to show maybe a little bit more of the kind of welfare footage, probably because it was fish, and we kind of have this connection with kind of aquatic animals versus land mammals, that they were able to maybe kind of get that in there and still have such high viewing figures. And then around that time as well, we had Game Changers, which I think I'm sure many of you have seen, a completely different model entirely as well. So it was very, very much focused on health. It was quite a sexy documentary. It had Arnold Schwarzenegger, James Cameron, Jackie Chan, etc., Novak Djokovic as executive producers on it. Some of these obviously not even vegan themselves. Didn't really show any of the welfare footage, and the stuff that when it did focus on the animals was kind of from a poaching perspective, and it had some quite what I suppose you would call manly guys that it was focusing on in terms of what they were doing, and it had athletes that looked good. It was showing what they could do on a whole food plant-based diet, and it was really entertaining. And it did really well for Netflix. It did really well when it was released pre-Netflix as well. And I would imagine from speaking to people over the last 4 years, because we've got to talk to a lot of the members of the public about other vegan documentaries, the Game Changers comes across really. It seemed to have really struck a chord in getting people to transition. One of the issues we do sometimes have from a health perspective, and when we look at the documentaries that are more centered around food, is we feel that if people transition for animal welfare issues, they tend to be vegan, like the vegan overnight kind of thing. But with the health, sometimes they may be pushing towards like a predominantly plant-based diet because they're doing it for health reasons. So it's, I suppose, a little bit like people that don't maybe they're not teetotal, but they only drink occasionally. So we would often find that people are vegan the majority of the time, but occasionally when I go out, then they may be vegetarian or maybe eat meat. But that was the kind of position we were in. So we were looking at these documentaries and we're like, well, which has worked? There's some excellent documentaries there, but what's worked for some, what maybe hasn't worked for others? What are some of the challenges that maybe some of them have had? And what can we do that's different? Because we don't just want to do an environmental-based vegan documentary or an animal welfare-based documentary. And so I said to Tom, a lot of documentaries tell people why to go vegan. I was like, we've never eaten meat. And obviously we've heard so many arguments why we should all throughout our lifetime. Why don't we do a documentary on why people won't go vegan? And so I said, we'll call it I Could Never Go Vegan, which in itself, it's been an interesting title in a quite a provocative way, because inadvertently, when people have heard that documentary, I think they've thought it was an anti-vegan documentary. And it's been amazing how many people have just come up to me and go, yeah, I could never go vegan too. And then they've started to tell me why they could never go vegan. And it's like, then they learn I'm vegan and then they backtrack. We start to again have these conversations. That's been a really interesting experience over the 4 years. But that was the idea, basically. So I said, we'll call it I Could Never Go Vegan. Let's focus on some of the core reasons. That was the initial idea. So between us, we started thinking, what are let's think of a half a dozen reasons. What are the 6 main reasons we've heard over the years why people can never go vegan? So we were thinking about things like protein, humane slaughter, these kind of justifications, that people would give. B12 obviously was another one. But we didn't feel, this was just a few weeks into it, that was big enough. We felt that we needed it to be broader, that we needed it to almost be an encyclopedia of all the reasons that we've heard over the nearly 40 years of our lives. So somewhat maybe foolishly, ambitiously, we just said, let's just do all the reasons. Let's just list all the reasons we can think of, and all the people that we know that are plant-based, or even the people that aren't plant-based that are giving all these reasons. Let's just look at all these reasons and let's try and fit that in to a 95-minute documentary, which is what we tried to do. And it's nearly 4 years now, a nearly 4-year journey. And to get to that point, so that was how we started. We started during COVID as well, so that obviously posed some challenges. And really, for the first year, it really was just Tom and I out on the road in the UK. We had some amazing support initially from the plant-based health professionals. So plant-based doctors within the NHS were so generous with their time, and that really was great to form a base for the documentary, because there was a lot of reasons that we hear that they could kind of talk about. So when you're thinking about certainly some of the deficiencies, so when you're thinking about iodine or B12 or iron or calcium, and these kind of micro and macronutrients that we hear that we need to eat. And then they were also able to talk about, well, I won't be thriving, I'll be malnourished, or the protein argument. So all the kind of health related ones, we had so many so many doctors, and also doctors that specialize in certain areas as well. So we had cancer doctors, we had GPs, we had gastroenterologists, we had people that focus on female health. So they were able to, give a really interesting insight into kind of the menopause and the benefits of a plant-based diet there. So the health side of it was kind of the stuff that we got banked really early on, and we kept coming back to. And one of the problems with the documentary that we had is documentaries take a long time to make, and it's changing all the time. So I would constantly, as the producer, be, Tom, a new study's just dropped. That this headline's just landed. We need to get this in there, and so we're constantly editing on the go, and which is another reason why it's taken so long, because we wanted it to be as thorough and well researched as possible. Around the same time as the health, as banking all the health kind of footage, we were also able to follow a number of athletes, which was fantastic as well, because we were able to keep revisiting them. So in the trailer, you'll have seen Sophia Ellis there, who is a British powerlifter. So we got to follow Sophia through the British Championships to the European Championships and the World Championships. And Sophia herself has been vegan since she was 15 years old as well. So half a life now, nearly. So she was an incredible person to follow. We followed an ultra runner that attempted or was attempting a world record around Barcelona, and then we also had who's probably been, certainly from audience test screenings, the person that people are going to talk to us about the most, and that was a gentleman called Paul Yude, who's 85 years old. He went vegan when he was 60, and his goal is to do 100 ultra marathons before he's 100 years old. So quite comically, Paul asked Tom to do an ultra marathon with him, which I don't think Tom particularly wanted to do. But obviously, Paul Yude at that point was 84 years old, and Tom, being in his mid-30s, could hardly say, no, I'm not going to join you for that, Paul. So Tom and Paul did a 50 kilometer race together, and also Paul, quite comically, and you'll see this in the film, at every checkpoint insisted on doing some press-ups, because he also wants to do 1 million press-ups between 80 and 90. And on his last count, I think he was on just over 200,000. So he's an incredibly inspiring individual. And also proof, and this also tied into another argument that we often hear, and I'm sure some of you will have heard as well, is that it's too late to go vegan. It's too late to make a difference. And that was why Paul was such an interesting character, because he went when he was 62 years old. And he speaks quite with a sense of pride that he's not on any medication now. And obviously that is anecdotal evidence, but we obviously, we go to the kind of studies after that to look at what Paul is saying bears weight. But he's a really interesting to be around. And I think, thematically, from watching Tom spend time with him, when he talks about what it means to have a good life, and he talks about kindness, and he talks about just giving back to people, and I think that kind of ideology is rooted in veganism anyway. So to see him doing it kind of in his broader life was a really nice bit of the documentary there. So we had the health thing with the doctors, we had the athlete section, we then moved on to the kind of food section, and this is a really big one for why people won't go vegan, because they think they're going to be missing the foods that they like. And I will say, but when people say to me about that it's difficult going vegan, being vegetarian in the 80s was significantly more difficult than being vegan now in terms of what was available in supermarkets. Like, we've never had it so good if you do want to eat, processed vegan food. Not that we would advocate that from a kind of a health perspective, but it's what a time to be alive for vegans, really. Certainly if you live in the UK, or if you live in the US, or if you live in kind of Western Europe. So we got to go and spend some time with a happy pair for this section, and someone called Tomi as well, the vegan Nigerian. So we wanted to kind of look at a kind of a broad spectrum of foods as well, because I think that's the other thing that I think people think with veganism. It's like you won't be able, there's going to be a lot of cuisines that you're going to miss out on, and we kind of wanted to see if that was true, or to see how easy it is to veganize dishes these days. So that was really interesting. And also a vegan baker as well that specializes in desserts, because I still hear all the time that you can't eat vegan treats, so you can't eat like cakes if you're vegan. I think a lot of the kind of general population think that you need milk and eggs basically to make cakes and buns. So, and I think that was one of Tom's favorite days, because obviously that was basically with a vegan cake specialist, and Tom got to sample a lot of stuff there. So I think that was a particular highlight for Tom. So that was the kind of food section, and accompanied alongside that, there was the cost angle, because we hear this quite a lot as well. The vegan diet is expensive, and we really wanted to get to kind of the kind of like dive into the evidence there. So, and we were thrilled to work with Oxford University on this. So it was actually one of the researchers from the Joseph Paul study from 2018 as well. I'm sure a number of you remember that huge environmental study that kind of came out, and almost, in essence, it kind of broke the internet from a if you were in that world, it was the kind of largest study we'd ever seen. And one of the researchers there then went on to look at basically food baskets and how much food costs and which diets are the most expensive, that was really fascinating. The pescatarian diet, just as a spoiler, is the most expensive diet, and the vegan diet was significantly cheaper in the Western world. Where issues arise with veganism, and I think, which is why sometimes people think of veganism as being the most expensive diet, is because a lot of the vegan processed food is expensive. But a vegan whole food diet, which obviously this study, because it's looking at whole foods around the world, vegetables, pulses, grains, the majority of fruits are significantly cheaper than meat and fish. So that was fascinating, and it was a real treat to work with kind of researchers from Oxford University on that for the documentary. We knew we had to tackle animal welfare, and this posed one of the biggest problems for the documentary for us, because even to this day, so the film will be released in 3 months' time in April in the UK. It'll be it's getting a theatrical run across cinemas. And even now, people that have just started to hear this information, and friends of mine that aren't vegan are saying to me, "You're not showing any animal cruelty in it, are you?" Which is, it's a really difficult one to answer as that as well, because it's obviously coming from people that eat meat but don't want to see it. So, you're having that conversation. But we know we want people to watch the documentary, but how can we get the point across and still show what is actually happening to these beautiful creatures in factory farms, and even on free range farms, or wherever it may be, around the world, not just in the UK. So we went undercover, and we worked with an investigative journalist, and we went undercover into a pig farm. I won't say where, but it was in the UK. And we gave the brief here. One of the things that we wanted to do was, we didn't want to see the worst one you could find. We didn't want it to feel like it was like a BBC Panorama special. We weren't trying to find the worst of the worst. We wanted to see what's normal. Like just find us a normal pig farm. So we went undercover and we filmed, or the stages, if you like, or from the piglets, from the sows, etc. And then we went to film in a sanctuary, a pig sanctuary, to see what they kind of look like as these, rescued animals that are just kind of living their best life. And then we worked with a former pig vet. It's got 15 years of kind of specializing with these animals, and we kind of compared the footage, and we looked at, and she actually said that the farm that we went undercover in was actually of a good quality. We didn't feel like that when we were in there, but it'll be interesting to, it did obviously make us question what some of the ones that aren't of a good quality are like. So that was a fascinating kind of experiment. And alongside that as well, we worked with a scientist in Copenhagen that had just created some AI technology to try to basically understand the vocalizations of pigs when they're happy, what it means, what scenarios cause them to grunt in this way. So we were kind of piecing together this overall picture of these animals. We wanted to focus on one animal, so we focused on the pigs, and to kind of take all this data to see what it really means. To answer that question, do these animals have a good life in the conditions? Because that's what we often hear in the UK, is that we've got the highest welfare standards in the world, or one of the highest welfare standards in the world. And that's another reason why we wanted to do the United Kingdom, because if we're apparently one of the best, or the best, what does that say for some of the other countries, certainly in the kind of the developed world, in the US, for example, or in Australia, or in France, or in Germany? And obviously the extension of that was then slaughterhouses. So we worked there with some investigators who went into slaughterhouses for us. This was where it was particularly difficult in what we could and what we didn't show. And so there is a little bit of it in the documentary. Certainly, the majority of the footage hasn't been used. That was a kind of a careful editing process, one that Tom really didn't enjoy. Tom really struggles with it significantly more than me, actually, in terms of seeing that kind of footage. I think I've become somewhat desensitized to it. And Tom obviously is the director and the editor as well, so we were both the kind of creative process in terms of shaping the whole documentary. We pieced that together in the best way, along with people that have worked in this environment. So some people spoke to us anonymously. Some people were happy to talk on camera because they've left the industry. We spoke to people that have come over from parts of Eastern Europe to work in the UK and how they feel about it. And we just kind of wanted to basically answer the question around, can we farm these animals in a way that they get a good life, and is there really such a thing as humane slaughter? It's probably not a spoiler, really, for you to all imagine what my kind of take on that is, and what the film's take on that is. So that was a huge section, and within that as well, we had the section on antibiotics as well, which is obviously a huge talking point. What we're doing to the kind of misuse of antibiotics as well. And this is something this was really personal to me and Tom. So my young son has a rare genetic condition and has to be on antibiotics for like the rest of his life. And I found myself getting choked up at this when you read the stats about this, and the fact that it's just the arrogance and of us as humans to kind of just keep throwing these antibiotics into kind of a food system at the detriment of us humans, that we have cancer patients that need antibiotics, or people suffer a range of conditions that are going to need them. And Gemma Newman, the GP of 20 years, really experienced practitioner, speaks quite eloquently on the subject in terms of what that could mean going forward. And Alice Bruff, the pig vet, who's done a lot of work on this as well, kind of paints the picture of what that could look like by 2050, and George Monbiot as well. So that was really interesting, and something that probably more than anything else, because it's so personal to me, really angers me. And of course, another huge section of the documentary was the environmental side of it. We still over the course of the 4 years of making the documentary from many people that said that, you know, there is no environmental crisis. There's nothing to worry about. It will fix itself. So this is a real challenge, actually. The environmental side is how do you communicate this? And we spent quite a bit of time with George Monbiot discussing this, who was a great contributor, speaks really, you know, he articulates his points really well. And we asked him, you know, this was one of the first things when I was talking to him, was like, if it really is as bad as we're told, why aren't governments doing more? And I asked that question because that is the question I keep getting asked when we were making the documentary. And George, again, speaks really well on the point. It's like, it's not in a politician's short-term interest to make such huge changes because they want to get. I think the previous person was just that was speaking was just talking about Keir Starmer, I believe, and saying that, you know, they do what they need to do short-term to get elected. Who wants to rock up and just start making wholesale changes and completely altering food systems that have been in place, you know, farming and agricultural systems that have been in place for decades? That is not how you get elected. And I think it's a real problem because we all have a part to play from an environmental perspective. And this is, you know, this is bigger than veganism. You know, you have the fossil fuel side of this. There's many things that we can do to reduce our carbon footprint, but it's more than CO2 as well. And this is another thing when speaking to George that was really fascinating on this section. I think a lot of people think, you know, we talk about greenhouse gas emissions, but people don't talk about eutrophication. We're not talking about what we're doing to the land. And that's the biggest thing in terms of from an environmental point of view for veganism. For me, it's just the sheer amount of land that we are using to farm animals. And this obviously then tied into a number of things that we've heard for why people could never go vegan, or why they don't need to go vegan, I think would be a better way of putting it, because we would hear a lot of people that say, well, I only eat locally sourced grass-fed beef or grass-finished beef. Well, more often than not grass-fed beef, without really realizing what grass-fed actually means, and the difference between grass-finished there, which was interesting. And then when you start to look into the studies, well, that's one thing. But if everyone moved over to grass-finished, how many other planets do we need? How much more land do we need for cows, you know, to graze if everybody was going to eat grass-finished beef? Is that really a solution if only a small percentage of people can do it? So, you know, there was dozens and dozens of these kind of reasons that were coming up for why people couldn't go vegan or wouldn't go vegan or didn't think they needed to go vegan. And the environmental one was probably the most frustrating. It's fascinating, but I can see the difficulty that activists have around this is because, I mean, soy is a perfect example here. I still, you know, we're the cause of the rainforest, aren't we? You know, we're us eating our soya, apparently that's our tofu. Us eating small amounts of tofu is apparently what's destroying the rainforests around the world. When, of course, when you look into the studies, you know, we're eating, what is it, about 7%, I think, of soya that's grown is eaten by humans, and the 70+% is fed to animals, which is then, you know, I think George says in the documentary something like there's more soya in the amount, you know, the chicken breast that the meat eater's eating than what the vegan's eating on his plate, that kind of thing. So yeah, but again, the environmental thing was fascinating and frustrating in equal measure, because that was the point where I thought this is quite hard to articulate to the general population. With the welfare stuff, if people see it, it's very hard to argue against. You know, we talk about something called thumping in the documentary, which is a term. This isn't a very nice, what I'm about to describe isn't very nice. I do apologize. It's basically the act of when basically a piglet is no good to be kind of grown to go to market. They'll be just bashed basically against the wall or against the metal railing, and they'll be killed in that way. And it is absolutely horrific, but it is done in the UK, apparently with one of the best, you know, welfare standards in the world. if somebody sees that, it's going to be a high percentage that are going to say they don't agree with that. Like they don't, that they don't want to see that. They think that's cruel. The majority of people will say that. But with the environmental stuff, you don't have that image. You don't have that. It's not tangible. And I think that's one of the real difficulties that we've got with the environmental kind of stuff, and what we found in the documentary, that people just don't believe it. And it's how do we get people to believe that we've got a real issue there? So that was fascinating. We look at some quite humorous ones. We wanted to kind of explore the maybe the more ridiculous ones that we've heard over the kind of the past few years. So we heard quite a few times that if we didn't milk cows, they'd explode. So we don't spend too much time on this one. We didn't feel that it needed too much investigation, but yeah, there's quite a lot of interesting reasons that people gave to us over the years. Obviously, canines came up. Yeah, if I would imagine, if you can think of, and I'm sure the people listening here, just think of the 3 or 4 main reasons that you've heard or that you've said over the years. You can list some of them in the chat box if you want me to talk about them in any more detail in terms of what we did to investigate and how it plays out in the documentary. But I'd like to think that it's a pretty exhaustive documentary, and that we've covered everything that we've heard over the years. Yeah. I think it'd be good to get some questions, Sailesh, actually, if anybody has anything.
Yes, thank you so much. That was a really great summary of the documentary, because I've seen it, obviously. And it is, to me, you kind of covered so many different questions that I've heard in my career. I've been doing this for 18 years now, so I've heard a lot. And I think you covered a lot of them in the movie. And this is why I really love the movie. I wanted to be part of it. Yeah.
Thank you.
I have one question for you. In the movie, you always see Tom getting a call from his mom. Is that his mother who's calling him? Yes. And so your mother is calling and asking the questions. Was that real? Was your mother really?
That is our actual mum. Yep, I'm actually at my parents' now. I've just come home to see my parents. I've not seen them for a while, and that is my mum. She's downstairs at the minute, and that is her voice in the trailer. And yes, she does feature a few times in the film of a phone. Yeah,
wonderful.
Yeah.
Let me ask questions from the audience now. Yeah, one other question is, when and where will it be available to watch for us? I mean, obviously, we want to have it on the next Convergence. Okay, I know that it's going to be in April.
Yes. So it will be released in the UK in April.
Mm-hmm.
It will be playing theatres across the UK. It will be announced next week, actually. That will be. So it'll have its premiere in London, then it'll play at theatres in the UK, and then it should be playing the US shortly after that. So it'll be available in America next, and then hopefully the rest of the world will follow. But we haven't confirmed the rest of the world yet. But the idea is, by the end of the year, it should be available everywhere, basically, to see. Yeah.
Wonderful. Good.
We want as many people to see this as possible.
Absolutely. And I think the title is catchy enough that people will come, but I'm not sure how many will come who want to watch to understand, but how many will come saying, I knew it. I couldn't go vegan.
Yeah.
And I don't know how many of them we can persuade, but it's a great angle. Anant Joshi, let me add you. Go ahead.
Hi, James. Great trailer and great explanation, and you cover so many things there. So it's really great to see. I just wanted to know 2 things. First of all, how did you go about getting funding? Did you get any government grants? If there's any other filmmakers here who want to go and get funding, I think that advice would be really useful. And secondly, you mentioned Game Changers, and the director there was Louis Versoyas, and he's got this documentary out. called "You Are What You Eat," a twin experiment. Just wondering if you've seen that as well, and your thoughts around that. And do you think it was an effective program?
So I'll answer the second question first. I haven't seen it. I've heard lots about it. People close to me have watched it. I went to the International Movie Database just to have a look at kind of what the general consensus was from non-vegans from the comments. It looks like it obviously is a very pro-vegan documentary, and I think probably Netflix haven't marketed it in that way, obviously, which I think isn't necessarily a bad thing because they want to get non-vegans to watch it. I'm looking forward to checking it out, but I haven't actually seen it, so I wouldn't be able to give too much reflection on how effective it's going to be. But I will say it's done really well for Netflix, and that's a good thing. So if a lot of people, Netflix is, I think, the second biggest streaming platform now after Disney. So if they're showing these documentaries, and this is why Seaspiracy was so successful as well, and Game Changers was on there, and was picked up again on there. So, and What the Health was through Netflix as well. So Netflix have done a pretty, for them it's a business, so they're probably not looking at it as the pro-vegan message, but they've done a good job inadvertently for the vegan movement, because I still hear people all the time that say, I don't eat fish anymore because of Seaspiracy. So that's a win. So
I do agree, and I was just going to say that I think they've changed their policies. I don't think will be supporting that many going forward, just because they're also ad funded now and they want the ad money. So I think, from what I hear from other directors, basically who are trying to get their shows listed, it's becoming a little bit more. They don't want to get into the more controversial, topics, I'm afraid.
One of the problems with Netflix, the models change now to such a way where they're really around 90% originals and 10% acquisitions, which means if you want to make I suppose any kind of documentary, but like a vegan documentary, and if you want that creative control there, you'd be going out to kind of make it on your own, which then makes it very difficult to get picked up by Netflix, because they're acquiring so little of kind of that aren't their originals, basically. So that is one of the challenges for filmmakers. Do you want Netflix involved at the start, but they may have an influence in what the documentary, and there is, I think there's been quite a famous example very recently of one where they maybe have parted ways because they probably didn't agree on what was featured in the documentary. In terms of you asked the funding question as well, sorry, didn't you? So we made this documentary for not that much money, but we were very generously supported by a small, I would say around a half a dozen, either individuals or organizations that gave very generously because they believed in the project. So it was all done through grants, basically. It wasn't done through any government kind of grants like the BFI or anything like that, or Doc Society as it would be in the UK. So yeah, we were very fortunate. There was just people that believed in the project, and it was kind of, we did it in stages. So with documentary filmmaking versus fiction, what we would normally do is we would go out and shoot a proof of concept ourselves, and that would just be from our own kind of pockets, if you like. So we put together a very small teaser trailer, which we were able to put out there and raise the first chunk of money from a donor, which then allowed us to go and shoot a significant amount of the documentary. Because during the production stage, Tom and I can do almost kind of every kind of role, and because it was COVID, that was also out of necessity almost. We knew we could get to a rough cut before post-production when we would need a significant, like the rest of the money for the roles that we couldn't do. So we can't color grade or we can't mix the sound, for example. So we knew we were going to need more money there. But it's much easier to raise money when people can see a rough cut, because they can see that they can see the vision for the film. They believe in the film. They also know that it shares their ideological values. Because I imagine it must be quite difficult if let's say you're passionate about a subject and people are coming to you, if you've never worked with them before, you want to know that they do genuinely share your vision. You don't want to be backing something that you're not ideologically kind of in line with. So I think that is one of the challenges for filmmakers. But I would recommend. I teach documentary filmmaking actually at one of the university in Manchester, and I say this to my students: if you can self-shoot, you can go out and shoot something, and then you can start to to raise the money. But you can show people something there to kind of get ahead of the curve, if you like. But yeah, that was how we funded it.
That's great. Looking forward to seeing it.
Thank you very much.
Watch, you're on next.
Oh, thanks, Dr. Rao and James. Great work, great presentation. I wanted to ask you, how many people of the crew which made the documentary are vegan or transitioned to being vegan? So I just wanted to find out what's the success rate of your documentary on the people who were involved.
A small crew. I are vegan. The person that scored the film is vegan. I think he went vegan just after we'd started shooting, but I'm not going to necessarily say it was because of us making the documentary. But he's an excellent composer, and he's a passionate vegan now, which is fantastic. Our sound recordist isn't vegan; he's vegetarian. Trying to think. Obviously, the 4 executive producers are all vegan, but they have Alicia Silverstone, Heather Mills, Alyssa White-Gloves, and Peter Egan. So obviously they came on board to support the film because they are passionate vegans. So that was how they kind of became on board the project. And then we've got the sound mixer and the color. So the colorist actually, so the colorist wasn't vegan, watched the film, and then went vegetarian, and has said that they're trying to transition to a vegan diet. It really had an effect on the colorist as well, because you can't really get out of not watching. You have to spend so long on the scenes when you're coloring the film. It was the animal welfare section, because obviously you're talking about a week or maybe 3 or 4 days to kind of color that whole entire sequence. So you're watching it over and over and over again. So he came to me at a networking event shortly after that, and obviously midway through the grade, and says, I can't eat meat anymore. So that was so that was about a year ago as well. So it had an effect on him. I'm not sure about the sound mixer though. Tom dealt with him. I've not heard that he's vegan. But yeah, it was a small crew, so we've not got much of a pool of people to kind of gauge that on, I'm afraid.
Ray?
Hi, James.
Hey.
I'm a filmmaker as well, so I'm very, very much looking forward to the film. And I've seen it in social media and wondering how long it's going to be before we can see this film. So I was kind of chuckling a bit when you said documentaries take forever.
You really do. You really, really do. Yeah. Yeah, I mean, that's been a learning experience as well. I mean, you probably know, being a filmmaker yourself, it's normally because you have got smaller crews, and also because you're not working to a script. So it's almost like the reverse of fiction filmmaking, if you like. The script comes after the footage, and you're piecing it together, and things just keep happening. And that was the other issue. It was like, to be fair, this happened with the Game Changers as well. I don't know if people remember, there was a delay on that because of Lewis Hamilton's stuff. So that got pushed back because they wanted Lewis Hamilton to win the F1 season. And we had Sophia Ellis was going off to the World Championships, and she'd done the Europeans, and it was like, well, do we wait? And then we hear about this new study's about to come out, and it's like, this study is going to be really good for the documentary. Do we wait? But it comes to a point where you can't keep waiting, because otherwise the film just doesn't get finished and it never comes out, which is why we made the decision, the trailer dropped in November 2022, and we thought by the end of summer 23 it would have come out, and it's obviously taken slightly longer, but it's coming out in spring this year, April. It will have its world premiere, and then it will be available in the territories around the world. Shortly after that, it'll be staggered. But yeah, that is the plan.
Most creative works, though, they run out of money or they run out of time, and then they got to get their air. They got to make their. But my question was, you've been in this topic for so long, and kind of marinating it, and you hear all the things directly from people and on social media, their excuses of why they can't go vegan. And I think it kind of boils down to 2 things. I don't think that if you took all the arguments against veganism and just sorted out the ones that were honest, I think it would reduce 90%. The conversation would shrink by 90%. Because when people are confronted by this, and I remember when I wasn't vegan and my wife was, I'd control the conversation and go in really weird directions about lions and Inuit and deserted islands and this sort of thing. But I think it comes down to two things: inconvenience and community. And as a vegan outreach activist, I'm so interested in how community has an effect, because people can make a decision on their own, but they have to live in the world. And I think they don't realize that's what they need, that they need to, they're observing the difficulties, the social difficulties with the friends that they have. And if there aren't enough vegans in the group, that always makes it worse. And that always makes it much more difficult to make that sort of a commitment. So, in outreach, we try to convince people to change, but I'm always aware of whether they've got community to support them. And then if not, try to find them one.
Yeah, that is a big struggle. And I mean, I think for a lot of, if you think of younger people here, because obviously there's a lot of the younger generation that are, a higher percentage of vegans, between 16 to 24-year-olds, just as an example. But if you still live at home and you want to go vegan, let's say you're 14 years old, but your parents aren't vegan and they won't help with that. It's very difficult. It's very difficult in that situation. So you do, really feel for, for teenagers in that sense. And I agree with you. If you're the only vegan and you've got a really close group of friends and you meet once or twice a week, or even twice a month, every month, and you always go to, you always go to a steakhouse, and there is a pressure there, I suppose, and you feel like you've been an inconvenience. I think what I started to find myself doing, if people would say to me, I could never go vegan because cheese and bacon, just as an example. So we hear them all the time. So I could never go vegan because I couldn't give up cheese. Give up everything else, not cheese then. Give up meat and fish and milk and not cheese, if it was just physical cheese. Because I think a lot of the time people, like you say, it's that kind of, it's all or nothing. But what you'd often find is it is incremental stages for some people. And the people that maybe like they do have those kind of social situations and community, they'd probably find that, well, when they're at home, they could cook vegan and they would enjoy it. And then that, 1 day, 2 day, 3 days of doing it would then become 4 or 5. And then they'd be confident enough to kind of potentially share their journey with their group. And they would kind of go into it. And even if they don't, let's say they're vegan 90+% of the time, but just that 1 day that they go out. I've got to the stage now where you start to question, well, that's better than them being not doing that any of the other days. And I know sometimes when you're talking with activists, depending on where people sit on the fence, what is the right or wrong way to do it. And I don't think there necessarily is a right or wrong way to do it. But I do think that once people make the change, and certainly I've had this, that I think personally, you do feel better. And I think you feel better physically, but also emotionally, spiritually, however you want to phrase it. I do think you feel like you're being better as well. And I think that is a big part of it. And I do think once people start to make the change, it doesn't have to be overnight. Not everybody's going to kind of follow. Some people will do it overnight and they will just stick to it. Some people won't be able to do that. It might take 6 months. It might take a month. It might take a year. But I think as long as people are kind of making that change and are actually actively trying to do that, I think we should be applauding that, and not, we should be helping them, kind of get past the things that are stopping them from doing it, rather than belittling people or kind of, putting unnecessary pressure on them.
I said those two things, inconvenience and community, is what it comes down to. But maybe it's only one thing. Maybe it's just fear. And I remember trying to go vegan, and after I went vegan, I was afraid, and I can't really remember why. It's fear of fear itself. So fear of inconvenience, and the fear of not having the community support you through those transitions. Thanks a lot.
Yeah, and I certainly think without just on that, because one of the sections, I didn't mention this section actually within the documentary, but we do look about that meat and masculinity. It's manly to eat meat. We look at that, and I think that fear thing for men, I think there was probably a time where men would be fearful of saying that they were vegan or vegetarian, and it's still a case today for some men, but I think it is starting to change. Certainly, you're seeing a lot of for a number of different reasons, but yeah, I think you're right. There is a fear. There is a fear.
Yeah, I went vegan because of watching Cowspiracy. Thank you, Sailesh. Because I was probably on the path. My wife had already been vegan for a while, but I needed something macho like climate science to justify this transition, and it got me past that emotional gap that I needed to cross to just recognize that this isn't a sentimental thing. This has got all sorts of science behind it. But in looking back, I recognize that kind of macho bullshit that was blocking me, and I hope to convey that to other people. That again, it comes back to that fear.
Thank you, Ray. James, did you ever get a chance to watch the Oxford Union vegan debate videos?
I have only seen the sound bites that Plant-Based News have been putting out. I haven't seen the full debate yet. I have seen a sound bite from you, though, Sailesh. Yes, I look forward to watching it.
Yeah, watch that, because it has a lot of the anti-vegan tropes, especially, because they were appealing to some base fear in people. Yeah. So that's what they were appealing to. And that's what the opposition is trying to do. Yeah. Where is the link for the full debate? I'm glad you asked. I will put it up shortly. Any other questions for James before we close this? Hold on. Let me check the chat, see if there are any questions for you. Yeah, people are saying thank you. Can't wait to watch the film.
Thank you, please. Yeah. If anybody cares to share the trailer or share the film when it comes out with you, obviously that would be greatly appreciated. Yeah, thank you so much.
Would you also have, would you allow community viewing of the film?
Yeah, that is something we're going to look to do once it's been released. Yeah, we're going to look to do some community viewings. Yeah, absolutely.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, and Veg Serbs is on next. Oh, Dolly, you had a question. Sorry, I didn't see your hand. Go for it. Okay.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
I can hear you now, Dolly. Yeah.
Hi, James. This is great. I'm so happy, as a fellow documentarist. We went through also many challenges during COVID. So I really understand that part, but we finally finished. And as Ray was saying, I feel like in my community, the Indian community, of course, it's the heavy religious, they got to have the milk. It's in the culture. And the other thing I think it is just the taste. It's just an excuse. They're so addicted to the dairy and they just can't get off of it. Mm-hmm. And it comes down to the pleasure of their taste buds.
Yeah.
Yeah. If you want to.
Yeah, food is a big one. That one we did some food taste tests within the documentary. I mean, a lot of the chefs we've spoken to, and I think a lot of chefs in general will talk about with a lot of dishes, it's how you spice them, it is how you flavor them rather than the actual chicken breast itself, in terms of what that actually is, in terms of what you do to it that often gives it the taste. With dairy and with milk, I mean, it's very difficult for me to speak on kind of India as a whole, being from, I'm very much, obviously, we were very much focused on the UK, the US, and kind of Western Europe. I was very mindful not to I'm certainly not in a situation where I should be telling people in other cultures, in other parts of the world, certainly, you know, that are obviously vastly different to the United Kingdom, what they should do from a dietary perspective. And I think, you know, culture and community within that is, you know, that plays a huge part. And I'm not in a position where I'm qualified or in a lived experience to tell people what to do there. But I mean, from a dairy perspective, you know, there's still a lot of dairy is drunk in the United Kingdom, but it is moving to more and more people drinking it in oat milk and soy milk. I don't know what the answer would be when it's so ingrained in the culture in India. Yeah, I'd be interested in. It's weird. We were speaking to a couple of people that we've spoken to are from that part of the world, and obviously a large percentage of vegetarians there. So so they get it.
Yeah,
a lot of people get it.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's just how you can kind of move it then from. So it's often harder to convince vegetarians to go vegan than it is for me.
It is. But I feel like, you know, when we cook for them, like when we make our tea or we cook for them, they love it. They're like, this is amazing. This is all possible. It's just they have to make that start. That's all.
Right. Yeah. I think through the stomach, you can get to the heart much easier.
That's right. That's right. That's how I did it with my husband.
One last question for you, James, before we let you go. From Joe in the chat. She's asking, hearing all these arguments against veganism, what's been your most effective rebuttal? What gets people to think for themselves?
Oh, that's a good question. The most effective, I think, this sounds quite cynical. I think that as humans, we're quite selfish and we think about ourselves quite a lot. And believe it or not, the health side of it is probably the quickest way to get people to change. My issue with that, and I'll refer kind of back to the start, is I think if you're doing it for health reasons, you're probably not going to be all in, because you'll think you can have cheat days, if you like, in inverted commas. I don't like to say cheat days when it involves eating an animal, but that is how people will probably see it. But yeah, I think more and more, I mean, that's probably not really answered the question in the sense of the biggest rebuttal, but I think people are seeing the benefits now of eating a majority whole food plant-based diet. And I think that that's really helping kind of the vegan movement. Even Netflix did the Blue Zone film, didn't they? Mm-hmm. Which obviously isn't an entirely vegan documentary. But when you've got the people that have the majority of, you know, people living to 100 in the world in these kind of communities, and they eat majority whole food plant-based diets, obviously it's not entirely, but I think only one of the communities is entirely plant-based. It helps convince people that at the very least, they shouldn't be turning their nose up at the term vegan or the term plant-based, and they should be introducing more of those kind of foods into their diet, which is why when you look at the statistics, it's such a high percentage now of people that are eating vegan, either, you know, certain times during the week. They're just maybe not doing it entirely, but it's a gradual shift. But I think that's probably the biggest change that I've seen over the past few years. Yeah, in terms of what's going to be, I'm curious to see what's going to be the biggest rebuttal. Once the film comes out, I'm curious to see the one where people go, I never knew that.
Right.
I never knew, you know, that was the one that I always said and I never knew. So yeah, I'll be able to answer that in a few months' time, what the kind of the biggest one that changed people. But yeah, I look forward to finding that out.
We'll certainly have you back. So thank you so much, James.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you, everyone.